Hey guys, it's Villain Fairy, and I hope you're all ready for this festive villain fun ranking. So wherever you are, I hope you're having some happy holidays. I need to give you guys the heads up that I'm going to be using the terms of villain and scenario interchangeably quite a lot here. I think you guys will understand that for the most part. I'm not going to give difficulty too much bearing in this video. I'm going to try and extract mod sets from the scenarios and just rate them, without the mod sets or with various mod sets is going to kind of be the equation here, and the ability to change the mod sets and get notable differences and kind of fun synergies is actually going to be a big point in somebody's favor. The game has been out for 5 years now. I've been playing for most of those, and I've been playing a lot. So the variety and replayability is actually a big factor here for me. And lastly, there's going to be a lot of biases here because this is my personal fun list. It is all biases, basically. It's what I enjoy myself. So let's get into it. So here we are, ready to begin. I'm going to try and keep this video a little bit positive because, I'm talking about fun and it's that time of year. But we have to be honest that not every villain is going to, do it for me. And I think the kind of a notable thing between heroes and villains in this game is that there's only a handful of heroes I'm really not that keen on. And even then, I can enjoy them quite a bit when I play them. Whereas some of the villains score a little bit lower on average, but I still enjoy almost all of them. Maybe barring this bottom tier here called Not For Me. But let's start with Rhino and see where the game's first villain, the tutorial kind of villain, falls. And for me, it's going to be flawed but fun. There's plenty of fun things about Rhino. I think he's well designed for what he's intended to be, show players the game their first experience. But 5 years into the game, so many years of me playing and playing a lot, he's just a little bit too basic for me. He does have a couple of interesting spicy things, but they can be a little bit swingy, and his main scheme threat threshold is, uh, it's just a little bit limiting for solo play specifically, and that just marks him down for me. So he is, he's fine. I think he's, serves his purpose, and a lot of people will play Rhino and only Rhino. There are people out there, I still hear that sometimes. They mostly, set down the game, get a new hero, and they just play against Rhino, and that's the game for them. Because, Marvel Champions is kind of like a cake. There are certain ingredients that go into it, and it makes up, kind of the foundations of the game. There's going to be a main scheme, villain, there's going to be a hero deck, so on and so forth. That's kind of the baseline experience. The way this all plays out is actually really fun at a foundation, the basic level. So when you're, getting new heroes in the game or we're getting new villains, I'm excited to see what they've done on top of or changing up the regular formula. If Marvel Champions is a cake, if it's got these ingredients you can kind of expect, and it makes kind of something very recognizable, I want to see, have they mixed any other ingredients in, any icing, any flavoring, what kind of decorations is going on? Because, that baseline is very easy to achieve. It's basically established, and it's not too far from Rhino, or maybe someone else like Absorbing Man, some of the plainer scenarios, Claw, obviously. But they have little differences, little things that really kind of elevate them, or in some cases, maybe the flavors didn't work together, bring them down. But really, we're looking to have these scenarios brought up. And for me, Rhino is kind of one of the most neutral, vanilla-ish. I guess vanilla is actually quite tasty, but plainish kind of villains that we have here. So I'm looking for things to kind of build off of that as we go. So let's just move on to Claw. I absolutely love Claw. I'm going to put him up here, I think. You know what? This top category, Peak Marvel Champions, I might leave this blank until the end. And the people in the second tier up, I'll pick my 5 favorites to move up. 5? That sounds good. So Claw is also kind of plain like Rhino, but he's not as plain. The encounter cards have a bit more going on to engage you. He's got more setup stuff, which is kind of one of the biggest challenges. Also, maybe his biggest flaw, because if you can get past the tough opening, generally he's a little bit easier for the rest of the game. But it does provide interesting challenge. I really like the way that he gets multiple boost cards. This is kind of the thing that makes Claw so great, because there are a lot of mod sets in the game with a lot of boost icons. Every time we get a new mod set with lots of boost icons, Claw kind of reinvents himself. Claw, for me, is always fresh. He reacts really well to mod sets, and he's one of the best villains if you want to include extra mod sets beyond the recommended amount in, and kind of timeless. I always like playing Claw. Next up, we have Ultron. And Ultron, for me, has been, for quite a long time, kind of tied with Claw when I'm talking about, my favorite from the core box, because these are all core box villains. I almost said heroes. As villain theory, sometimes the line between hero and villain, it's a little bit blurry. And Ultron, I think, has more creative ideas, the way the drones work, differences on his villain stages, the main scheme stages, they're so different, especially like his last main scheme is so good. I hope they kind of reuse that a little bit. But basically, he's got way more creative ideas, I think, than Claw, but he's also a little bit more one note than Claw. If Claw is kind of a all-rounder in many ways, Ultron is all about his drones. Now, he can hit really hard without them. He has, some interesting side schemes and bits going on. He's not just about these drones, but if you can handle the drones well, generally you win, and if you can't, generally you lose. And I played him so much, it's kind of just I think he doesn't have as much replayability as Claw, so I have some very, very fun memories of Ultron, but I don't feel entirely compelled to play him again a lot. So for me, I think he's going to drop down 1 or 2. Still an amazing scenario, but this far into the game, I just don't really feel that compelled to keep playing him. I play him occasionally, great occasional play, um, but he doesn't have the legs that Claw has, in my opinion. So for now, I'm going to put him here. And while that might have sounded like a negative, that's still very fun. I actually really like this game. That's maybe why I make content for it. So even this middle tier here is still actually a really, really good place to be. Next up, we've got the Green Goblin scenario pack scenarios. And let's make this simple. Norman Osborn, aka, the risky business scenario is going to go here. And the mutagen formula, where he's always Green Goblin, it's gonna go. I almost just put it straight in the top category. That's how much I like it. Maybe it will end up there. We'll put it here for now. But this scenario pack comes with 2 scenarios on the complete opposite sides of the spectrum. But I would say Mutagen Formula Green Goblin is so good, it's definitely worth the pack. And Risky Business isn't bad. Risky Business is full of some really good ideas. The villain basically has his own alter ego side, and that's so compelling. They've kind of done slightly newer versions with different forms or different kind of versions of villains. But to me, they haven't ever done something so clearly, as an alter ego form with their other identity on one side of the card. I hope they do it again. But it's kind of flawed. You can game it very easily. I'm pretty sure I realized this after my first game of Risky Business. You flip Norman to Green Goblin, take a bunch of damage. Oh, he flips back to Norman. Oh, I didn't get to do much. He hit me pretty hard when I flipped him. What do you do? Well, it's not a strategy video, so I'm not going to say too much. But if you're well prepared for when you flip Norman, things generally go in your favor, and it's very, very easy to do. So yeah, this scenario just doesn't quite fully function to me as printed, and I am rating them as printed, not with any little homebrew tweaks. So he's got to go down there. Whereas a Green Goblin, this is a little bit like Claw. It's got some really good minions. It's got some really good side schemes. There's a lot of cool things going on. Claw has quite a few minions. Green Goblin has a lot. Minions are the most fun type of encounter card in Marvel Champions. So if you've got a lot of minions in the encounter deck, chances are that a villain is a pretty popular one that you enjoy. I just think they are the best encounter card type. So being a very minion-heavy scenario means Green Goblin is already got an advantage, and everything's just fun. And it's Green Goblin. It's iconic. It feels like Green Goblin. He's got all the pumpkin bombs and all sorts. So actually a huge, huge fan of him. Next up is Wrecking Crew, which is a little bit like Risky Business for me. It's, these are very early scenarios, and they're trying to do something new. In this case, with Wrecking Crew, it's the first multi-villain scenario. In fact, there are 4 villains out at once. But it's kind of flawed. The way this threat kind of works is just doesn't really work, in my opinion. So I do enjoy these guys from time to time, and I definitely used to enjoy them more in the past. But for me, I just do not feel compelled to play them. Nowadays, we have so many multi-villain scenarios that you can kind of get basically all the good parts from these with none of the bad, which just kind of leaves them in the, I don't want to call them obsolete, but the scenario pack doesn't even come with any mods that to change up other scenarios, so you can kind of pass over that scenario pack without too many worries. Next up is Crossbones, and I'm kind of of 2 minds with this guy, because he's kind of plain, but he does have a strong weapon theme. He does have, indirect damage, extra ways to get hit, and 3 different mod sets that you can build with him. Actually does a lot, so he's maybe in some ways a little bit plain for me, but in other ways he's very customizable, and everything is just fun. He's still got kind of the Rhino problem. Some of his encounter cards just say he gets a tough. It's not that interesting to me, but it is fine. I really like what he does. I generally always have a good time playing Crossbones, so actually very fun. Really, really pretty good. Then we have Absorbing Man, and Crossbones was from Rise of Red Skull. Absorbing Man is too. The next 3 heroes will be villains, will be as well. Absorbing Man for me is going to be in flawed but fun. There is nothing inherently bad about Absorbing Man, except nothing is very interesting. If Rhino is our plain cake, Absorbing Man is somehow plainer. Now, Absorbing Man has more interesting things kind of designed in him, but he has to have the right kind of environment out on the board, which they change in and out as you get different encounter cards. If you don't have the right environment out, the encounter cards you're getting are basically more boring and don't do as much. So you have basically, I don't know, let's just say a 1 in 4 chance of having the encounter card be more interesting. But in actual fact, it's probably not that interesting and a little bit too easy. I know difficulty shouldn't be a big thing, but if the encounter card just isn't doing anything, it's how do you engage with that? What do you do? So nothing really wrong with him, but he definitely feels a little bit more designed for campaign mode. And I should have said this earlier, but I'm basically a standalone scenario player. I play the campaigns once, maybe twice, 3 times if you Rise of Red Skull, but I just like the standalone experience so much more. So then we have Taskmaster. I really like Taskmaster. He used to be one of my most played when I started out, but there's something a little bit, off with the side schemes, which are actually kind of beneficial for the player a lot of the time. It's a little weird, but I do like how he punishes flipping. I like kind of the theme and everything going on with Taskmaster. So for me, he's not quite flawed enough to be down here, but he's not quite doing anything too special these days for me to be further up. So he's fun. I like Taskmaster. Always happy to play him. Then we've got Zola. I really like Zola. Probably, spoilers for Red Skull. Probably my favorite from the Rise of Red Skull box. He's got a lot of minions, which just gives him that advantage because I think minions are so fun. You can attack them, defend against them. They've got varying health, varying traits on them, which are interesting keywords. Is what I meant. But they can also scheme and different kind of considerations to go on there. They just use more of the game and more ways to interact than side schemes, attachments, treacheries, that kind of thing generally. But he's also just fun. He's a mad scientist. He's upgrading these crazy minions with these putting these big attachments on them. It's just a solid, really fun scenario. Can be a little bit punishing in solo play, maybe more than you'd expect, but just very, very fun. Then we've got Red Skull, and I'm really torn with Red Skull because part of me wants to put him in very fun, part of me wants to put him in incredibly fun. So I'm probably going to put him in extremely fun, which is still very, very good. So Red Skull, I think, is one of the most changeable scenarios by mod sets because all the side schemes go into a special side scheme deck, and you're going to get to see them reliably. They can have a big effect on the game, and because all the side schemes go into this special side scheme deck, it thins out his remaining deck. So any minion modulars or anything else you put in there, you're going to see that stuff quite a bit as well. So you can change it up a lot. And it's just fun. There's lots of things to interact with. There's minions, as I said. There's a lot of minions typically left with Red Skull. But also, you've got these side schemes, which are one of the other most interactable types of encounter card in the game. But he's kind of one note in the way that I kind of feel like Ultron is. If I have a deck that's really good at dealing with drones, I know Ultron is, going to be taken care of. Similarly, with Red Skull, he's Mr. Side Scheme, and if I can stay on top of the side schemes all game, I'm basically going to be absolutely fine. It might even feel, slightly easy. But if I am maybe not bringing that much threat removal, I know I'm in for a world of hurt. So I almost know if I've won or lost before I've begun the game. Now, this is maybe I've played too much, kind of problem here, but I think he misses out on being an incredibly fun, but doesn't deserve to be in very fun, as if that was a bad thing to be very fun. Next up is going to be Kang the Conqueror, the scenario pack just before Galaxy's Most Wanted, I believe it came out, and I absolutely love this one. I just dropped this one incredibly fun. If you watched everyone's favorite villain, which is a video of mine where everyone in the community came together to talk about one of their favorites, he was one of the ones I wanted to talk about. Now, there were some other strong considerations for me that other people had talked about, so I slightly picked out Kang. Whether he makes my peak Marvel Champions, we'll have to see, but he definitely makes at least of this tier because he's really, really good. It's a longer scenario, so I don't play it like all the time. It's not like, oh, well, Marvel Champions, oh, we'll just throw down Kang. It's a little bit more of a commitment to play Kang because he has 3 stages, not the usual 2. But it is really fun how he, in the middle phase, splits players up. But even in solo play, you don't know what villain you're going to be ending up fighting, so it still has that great solo replayability. I don't think it loses anything in solo. I think it gains a lot in multiplayer, if that makes sense. And I think that's kind of fun too. But mostly it's just the epic Kang experience where, going through time and he is, he feels like such a cinematic epic boss, which I really like. Now we're on to Galaxy's Most Wanted, and first up is Drang. And Drang, for me, used to be one of my top 3 scenarios in the game. And he's kind of fallen off for me. I kind of fallen out of love with Drang. He is really interesting. He's got lots of minions, which is a big advantage and stuff. But we're taking out the modular sets, right? But Band of Badoon just works for him so well. Band of Badoon is a really almost basically S tier mod set in terms of fun, but take that S tier mod set out of Drang, and I think it's quite a kind of slightly bare shell. The ship command, Milano thing, and all the side schemes he has kind of scale a little bit weirdly in 3 and 4 player especially. So for me, while he remains very fun, side schemes, minions, and just is a really good, clean kind of Marvel Champion experience. It's still really good. It's still very fun. And what also maybe hurts him is the fact that we have even more minion heavy scenarios and other mod sets and things that work well in other scenarios now. compared to him because he was in the second expansion. We now have like 7 expansions or something, a lot, and yeah, the competition is just a lot. Then we have Collector 1. And guys, I hate Collector 1. If you've listened to the podcast, Shadow the Cast with me and Nelson, I talk about him on the episode which D20 is on. And let me tell you guys, Collector 1, also known as Infiltrate the Museum, I despise this scenario. I think it's very unique. It's got a very unique idea at its heart. There's a collection, cards get taken away, you have to try and get them back. That sounds fun. That sounds like, oh, that's what the collector would do. He'd collect stuff. It's a nightmare. So you've got, your hero, you've got your deck of cards. He's taking away some of your toys, but he's also collecting his own toys. And if he collects too much stuff, you have to pay to get them out. Given the time of year this is being released, I want you to imagine the collector scenario as kind of, let's say you've got a bunch of kids, you've just given them some presents, they've got new toys to play with, and you come along and say, we're going to play a game where I'm going to take some of them away, you're going to pay me to get them back, and if you don't do it, we just stop playing and you don't get to play with them. That is collector to me. It's just not a fun mechanic. It's kind of an interesting challenge to think about how you're going to overcome it, that kind of thing. But for me, collector is just too blah. But Collector 2, the second Collector, is a different story. I actually like Collector 2. I don't think it's amazing. I think it's good. It's the first scenario where you kind of win by thwarting rather than, defeating the villain, I think. So I think I'm going to put it in fun. It only has a couple of its own encounter cards, and they're pretty basic. It's like Insight, Confuse, but it does use the Galactic Artifacts mod set as mandatory, and that one is really fun. But it's just not quite doing enough for me. Like, I could put that mod set in other scenarios and get most of that fun out of it. Just the thwart to win. It's different, but I don't necessarily know it's more fun than damage to win. There's nothing wrong with it. I quite enjoy it when I play it, but it doesn't quite move up to the very fun category. It just doesn't have enough going for it. Then we have a very fun scenario to talk about. Fun to talk about, maybe not fun to play. Depends on your perspective. That's Nebula. So I really kind of like Nebula's design overall. I love that she has these techniques that kind of give her some kind of passive thing that you have to play around. It changes how you approach things. But then when she attacks, they're going to do something else. And you can see all of this coming. You can play around it. It's very tactical. And it's also thematic. She's got these techniques. You can kind of see she's going to use these different moves and things. I really like everything about that. But why did they put so much surge into this scenario? And why did the evasion counters work like that for the threat? I feel like the techniques are a 10 out of 10 idea. And then the evasion counters are like a 2 out of 10. And then the surge is like a 0 out of 10. On expert mode, the techniques are particularly hard to remove, which can, cause the surge, putting a lot of them out there, just go completely haywire. Standard, I think, is a lot better, but as someone who mostly plays expert, and it's got those 2 heavy flaws, I can't put it into fun or very fun, which is what I think the techniques deserve, but I don't think its flaws put it down to not for me. I still actually enjoy playing Nebula quite a lot, and I haven't really been ordering the tiers yet, but I will. But for me, I think Nebula, I actually move up a couple. Nebula is one of the hardest scenarios I like to play, more than some others coming up. Spoiler alert. But she still is severely flawed, but severely fun at the same time. It's kind of how I see Nebula. And then we've got Ronan, probably the most infamous scenario in all of Marvel Champions. His difficulty is just baseline, brutal, so much damage, so many keywords everywhere, overkill, piercing, toughness, everything. Without his usual mod set, and I should say for Nebula, her usual mod set is Space Pirates, which some people just really don't like, and it has because the way it gives extra boost cards, which often give surge and things, or put techniques out for Nebula. Space Pirates and Nebula, maybe not the best combo if you're frustrated by Nebula. Try Nebula with a different mod set. Ronan's mod set adds very plain minions, the Kree militants, that also just have a few keywords on them. I don't think they're that interesting or engaging. And they kind of combine with him in a scary way. So Ronan, I also recommend with different mod sets from a fun perspective. But if you like the classic challenge of Ronan, obviously keep them the same. But for me, his cards are just kind of plain. It's like, oh, Ronan attacks. Ronan gets piercing overkill for, a couple of attacks. Ronan gets a tough and surges, and surge this and attack that. And I don't think there's a ton going on there in terms of, anything too creative. A lot of the difficulty also comes from this command ship, which is a hazard icon. So in solo play, it's just double encounter cards. It does let you kind of cancel one, but I just don't think it's that engaging of a way to make things difficult to just, oh, more encounter cards. It's fine, but it's not my favorite. And unfortunately, all that combined, he is down and not for me. But Collector, Definitely. Collector, I almost need his own tier for. I really do not like Collector 1. But yeah, that's Galaxy's Most Wanted. Scoring a little lower in general, with Drang being the highest, but nonetheless, I still like Drang and Collector 2 quite a lot. And comes with a lot of good mod sets. Don't let this put you off getting that expansion per se, but just know the scenarios maybe aren't going to be the best of the best, in my opinion. Next up, we have the Mad Titan's Shadow, starting with Ebony Maw. Now, in 3 and 4 player, Ebony Maw, there's just not enough spells to really go around, especially at 4 player, especially an expert, because you start with so many spells out. It's kind of weird, and he can be prone to surge trains, so, he's got a couple of notable flaws, but I love Ebony Maw. Ebony Maw also has something in common with Nebulous Techniques in that his spells that come out, you see them there, they're ticking down, you know they're going to go off, you know you have to deal with them, but you can kind of see it, you can kind of anticipate it a lot of the time, and that is really fun to play around. And I just think he's got a fun mixture of stuff in general that really elevates him for me. I think 2 player, which is my most common play count, is a sweet spot for Ebony Maw. I think he's at his most fun there. And I'm really torn between which of these to put him in. I think currently the second to top tier, current top tier, is kind of stacked right now. And I don't know if I like him as much as those. So I'll put him at extremely fun, but I actually really like Ebony Maw, particularly on expert. Just watch out, 4 player expert is maybe not so good for Ebony Maw. Then we have tower defense, and kind of like Ebony Maw as well, both of these scenarios used to be, I consider, top 10 for me. But now we have a lot of cool mutant scenarios and different things. I think they've fallen out of there. This is quite a flawed scenario as well. The main scheme mechanic is a little bit wonky. Uh, these kind of you kind of protecting his tower, but outside of the campaign mode, it's kind of a little kind of forgettable. Generally isn't always important, but I like to play almost as if I'm aiming for a high score, trying to keep as much damage off the tower as I can while still winning. And when you have that mentality, it actually becomes a really fun scenario. So I think for me, that elevates it up to very fun, but it's just got too many flaws just to nudge it any higher for me. Then we have Thanos. Now, when we first got Thanos, I hated this permanent Star War. I was like, I can't use my stuns, I can't use my confuse, and I didn't even like to use those cards, that much. But some characters have them built in, and it feels very bad that you can't use them on the villain. But I kind of got used to this. I kind of accepted that this is Thanos' thing. He is inevitable. You cannot, easily stop him. And they also put Steady and Stalwart out a lot more after Thanos in the next few expansions. So I guess maybe I kind of got used to it, even if I still don't love that. He's just fun. He's a great bruiser in many ways. He's like Rhino. He just wants to hit you in the face. But the main scheme isn't so oppressive. His cards are more interesting, and he's got the Infinity Gauntlet. And spoiler alert: if you watch my top 10 mod sets video, you might see a certain gauntlet full of Infinity Stones featured there. So for me, I think I'm always happy to put Thanos up to the top. For me, he is just really, really solid. Always happy to take him on. He's also very, iconic, which helps. And then we have Hela. Hela is the people's darling. People love Hela. People love the story element. I like the story element, but someone who plays like Arkham Horror and other games, Mobile Champions doesn't really do the story element super well for me. I like parts of it, but it's not like incredible to me. And this scenario is very easily gameable, taking out some of its, biggest elements of threat, not in terms of, main scheme threat or side scheme threat, but, in terms of being in danger, you can kind of just eliminate a lot of it. And it took us 1 play to figure that out when the box came out. But it has a lot going for it. I really liked kind of the theme. I like the kind of the story mechanic. So it goes up to fun for me, but it's kind of got a few flaws in my opinion. But the fun things are, enough to lift it up here. Finally, for this box, we have Loki, and I'm afraid the Asgardians have not done well here. Loki is not for me. I don't know where I put him in regards to Ronan if I start to put this tier in order. I think what I end up with this tier is Ronan, Loki, Wrecking Crew, Risky Business, and then way last Collector. But to talk about Loki, he takes so long to fight. He's got healing, he stuns you, he's got toughs, he's got so much base HP, particularly on expert mode. You have to get through 60 hit points per person, basically, which just feels like an incredible amount, especially with all the stuns, healing, and toughs going on repeatedly. And he's kind of swingy in some ways. I don't know. I just don't love Loki. I'll put it that way. I'm not like against playing him. Um, you know what? We'll put Ronan down one. I think I prefer to play Loki a lot of the time. I just think he's got more interesting things going on, but it's just kind of a little bit tedious. Next up, we have Hood from his scenario pack. And I like the idea of him. He has so many different mod sets that you kind of use with him, coming in a random order, but he has like the most plain vanilla boring kind of kit you could imagine around that mechanic. All his own encounter cards are just very plain and quite boring in my opinion. uh he's kind of a hollow scenario to me. The designers have basically said his scenario pack was kind of just a way to give people modular sets. The modulars he comes with are like 10 out of 10 practically, but the hood himself just leaves a little bit to be desired. I do enjoy him, maybe more than Absorbing Man, maybe more than Rhino, but he's kind of down there because his main mechanic, aside from having these plain cards, is effectively Surge, or will probably Surge, and I don't really like that mechanic at all. Next up, we have Sinister Motives, and I love this box. Now, Sandman for me used to be like a top 10 scenario. I think the mechanic of it, I've played it so much, is slightly one note in the way that like Ultron or Red Skull are. You've got these sand counters, and if you've got characters with at least moderately good attack, you completely basically just negate the whole sand counter mechanic. But I do like the whole way it works. I think the sand counters are somehow very thematic. They made it really work. Like this place is getting flooded by sand. It's really fun how he does indirect damage, but has that low scheme and high threat threshold main scheme, so you can flip down on. But it's kind of dangerous to deal with when you're in hero form. So I think for me, extremely fun. I think if he's maybe newer to you, he's maybe an incredibly fun, and maybe he still is there if you're a veteran player. But for me, kind of feels like he moved down a bit, but it's still an absolutely solid, fun scenario. Next up is Venom, and I love Venom. It's such an interesting kind of iteration of Norman Osborn Risky Business in terms of this bow tower. When it's got cannons on it, it's kind of the time to go and hit him, and when it doesn't, you have to be a bit more careful. There are some ups and downs with that. Some of the changes in rules to taking and dealing damage make that a bit weird, but still just a very fun all-round scenario. Good amount of minions, a lot of interesting stuff going on there, but the side schemes are pretty meaty. Just a very fun kind of brawl, but very different to like Thanos and Rhino. Very much its own thing. So just huge fan of Venom and very iconic villain as well, which always helps. Then we have Mysterio. And oh boy, this tier is getting big, but I guess it should be kind of big because we're going to move some up to peak Marvel champions. But I love fighting Mysterio. Mysterio is a little bit random, and every so often it goes out of control. But for me, that is barely even one game in five. Probably not even that. The game is usually very fun, kind of unpredictable, keep you on your toes as he puts encounter cards into your deck, which is such a unique mechanic. Very thematic. You're starting to doubt yourself, tripping up these illusions and tricks and things. Just a solid, well-made scenario, in my opinion. Next up, we have the Sinister Six. For me, this was used to be a top 10 scenario as well, but it's fallen down hard for me. And one of the problems with it is a little bit like Wrecking Crew. It doesn't, take well to modular sets, but part of it is if you can stop them actually hitting you, basically the activation kind of never moves on. You can kind of keep it on the same one. And so for me, I think this has fallen all the way down to fun. I still like this scenario, but there's just a lot of new stuff and other good stuff out there that it just doesn't quite elevate itself above them to me, in my opinion. But I do still really like it. I think this ends up being at the top of this tier, definitely. Maybe I'll even move it up depending on how many go in here. Then we have Venom Goblin. And without its regular mod set, which is Goblin Gear, which is very annoying because of that stupid glider mainly, uh, without that, he's a lot better. But I still don't like the mechanic, especially on expert mode where you get it at the start of the game and when he changes form, stage later on. We just get a million encounter cards. I think that's very kind of almost lazy. I just don't really like getting this massive rush of encounter cards. Feels bad, but I do love how kind of cinematic and epic he feels with this glider moving around, different effects going off. Again, you've got a very Venom-like symbiote kind of theme as well, which is quite striking and I enjoy. So for me, he's either at the bottom of fun or flawed but fun. Think I'm going to put him at the top of flawed but fun. Loads of really good stuff with Venom Goblin, but just some stuff that's a little too crazy and not the most fun way. And now, my friends, it's mutant time. We're on the last free expansion starting with Mutant Genesis, and we've got Sabretooth. For some reason, they made a scenario where you kind of have this little threat race at the beginning. It's not too difficult, but then you have to defend every turn, or the little guy that you rescued from thwarting, or just get destroyed by Sabretooth. And that's fine, except Sabretooth also heals, so he's forcing you to defend, but he's also healing. It's slowing you down from two different angles. It feels a bit tedious. The recommended mod set includes Mystique, which is terrible, but outside of that, it's a lot better. But still, for me, I think this is fun but flawed. It's just slowing you down from two different ways that doesn't feel too good to me. It's just kind of a slog. You can rush it, but then you're kind of just bypassing the whole point of playing Sabretooth and the whole, protect the senator kind of thing. It's kind of weird to me. Project Wide Awake is up next. Some people really like this, and I mean, if this was for thematics alone, the thematics here are like almost 10 out of 10. But I don't know. Solo play the threshold feels a bit dodgy. Some characters who maybe want to rely more on allies, this was a little bit weird. Leadership gets a little bit punished, which isn't the worst thing. But I don't know. I don't feel that compelled to play this scenario very much. Because outside of thematics, it's just mechanically, yeah, there's a lot of sentinels coming out, and I can't block with allies. I don't know. It doesn't do it for me, kind of like most other scenarios do. So for me, it's going to end up in flawed but fun. I wish kind of maybe in solo play the limit was like one more generous. I wish that there's just something else a little bit more spicy, because what I think one of the problems is, in terms of expert mode, is it's steady or stalwart, and you are basically told not to block with allies. It's kind of stopping you from two directions at the same thing, and that's all kind of mandatory. There's not a mod step there that will let you alter that. That is how the scenario works. So yeah, it doesn't score too highly for me, I'm afraid here. So Mutant Genesis not doing well here, and that might be about to continue with Master Mode, who I'm just going to drop in not for me. So Master Mode's really interesting. He has a lot of minions, which I like. There's upgrades to them. It's very much like Zola, and I love Zola. But Master Mode, it just does something with, it's just somehow a little bit less interesting. I think, giving him Star Wars a little bit less interactive. Combine that with, you're not really allowed to go Alter Ego, or you get punished quite hard. And I don't think the game needs to punish Alter Ego any more than it already does. And worst of all, the game gives you Magneto. I do not like forced allies, and Magneto just feels very, very generous. He's an extraordinarily good ally. However, we have some redemption from Mutant Genesis coming with the second half. Once we get outside of the Sentinel arc, we start to have Mansion Attack, and I really like Mansion Attack. I might put it at the top of very fun. So you have like four different villains, four different like main schemes, and you have to take out multiple uh, villains, and you can go through at least one side scheme. So you get to see different places to fight in, and you get to fight different people. All these iconic sort of mutant villains in the Brotherhood, and you kind of don't know what you're going to get, and that gives it kind of the surprise factor, very replayable because there's different combos, different fighting Pyro in the basketball court is very different to fighting Toad somewhere else, and so on. So I like all of that. It's maybe a little bit too unpredictable with some, less desirable combos and some actually pretty easy combos, which just make it maybe not able to go higher for me. But I still really like Mansion Attack. Very, very fun. Then we have Magneto. Magneto easily goes up here for me. One of my favorite final villains in any expansion box. So good, hits you with all these different things, really high tempo. But it's not just tempo; he can just hit you hard and end the game if he wants to. But you can generally play around it to some degree. His tempo is so high that some people do struggle with it. Definitely, when he was first released, I was like, "Whoa, this guy's is this another Venom Goblin?" But he's not quite as hard. But difficulty aside, he just does so many interesting things. I really, really enjoy him. It's always a fun experience for me for Magneto. Before we go any further, I kind of want to reorder some of the categories so far. I'm going to leave incredibly fun as it is because we're taking from there for the top category. So I'll rank the top two in order last. But I'm thinking for me, Red Skull goes above Ebony more. And actually, I kind of like the lower tiers here, how I've done it. I have kind of done those as I've gone a bit more. I guess I ordered it more than I thought I did. So let's move on to Magog. Magog is part of the MojoMania scenario pack, and he easily goes up here too for me. Spoiler alert for the next two picks. It's my favorite from MojoMania. Just really like it. The counter mechanic, the way the main scheme and defeating him works, it still makes damaging the villain or thwarting the main scheme valuable, but in a different way to normal. It's just the same but different. It's hard to explain, but it's also just a fun arena showdown with a lot of interesting back and forth, kind of a catch-up mechanic almost in there for both characters, which is really, really fun to see. And it's an arena fight. Are you not entertained? Next up is Spiral, and I used to really like Spiral quite a bit, but she's kind of moved down for me. Not quite flawed, but fun, but definitely on the lower side of fun. And there's a couple of reasons for this. A bit like Sinister Six, a bit like actually Wrecking Crew. Mod sets aren't really able to be used here. She kind of uses the ones that come with MojoMania, and that's kind of how she's designed. And she does have fun uses of them, but I kind of know what I'm getting with Spiral. I do like that Spiral does kind of the Norman Osborn risky business alter ego form, the cornered and non-cornered forms of Spiral where you get to attack or not attack. I do kind of like that mechanic, but it's just something a little bit weird about the tempo of, where is cornered. Sometimes you can corner her faster, sometimes it's like at the bottom of the deck, and it's just a little bit kind of weird in that way. But I still like this scenario. It's still very fun, but it's not very fun in terms of going up into that category. Now, the last scenario from MojoMania is no surprises, no prizes for guessing. It is Mojo himself, and for me, I think he goes to the top of very fun. Always feels like a bit of a pain to set up, and he doesn't, get to use different mod sets from beyond MojoMania, kind of like Spiral. So I kind of feel like I played most of the varieties of Mojo, but he's kind of crazy. I kind of like how different he is. Very fun. So that's where he goes. Next up, we have a Next Evolution, starting with Morlock Siege, which I think for me goes to extremely fun. It's got this kind of knock mechanic at the start where you can see the Marauders are breaking in, and then suddenly the Morlocks are under attack and you have to defend them. But it's kind of more forgiving than Sabretooth on that front, but it's also not slowing you down from two different places, and generally more interesting with a variety of villains because you fight, three different villains across the scenario basically. On the Run is very similar in terms of that it uses the same Marauder villains, but whereas in Morlock Siege, you fight one, defeat it, fight another one, defeat it, fight another one. And what that means is if you pull one that is really bad for you, you can try and rush it down sooner. You can kind of get rid of it, interact with it. Whereas with On the Run, once you have a Marauder villain kind of chosen, that is your villain for the whole game. And since it's random, you can pick your heroes, your decks, everything, get ready to go. And then the Marauder can completely counter what you want to do. Now, this is more of an expert thing. The jump up between standard and expert is particularly high here. There's for a few of them, but as someone who mainly plays expert, I love this scenario. I love the different villains, and it's got a lot of minions too. It actually feels very much like Mutagen Formula Green Goblin, which I really like. But just sometimes getting bad matchups with the villains really puts me off it a little bit. It just feels like a little bit too random. I think for me, this still ends up in extremely fun. But it is just a little bit less so than maybe the others. You know what? In fact, I think Morlock Siege deserves to move up one. There we go. Next up, we have Juggernaut, and this is where Hope Summers arrives, and she's in all three of these scenarios. Juggernaut, she's in Mr. Sinister, and she's in Strife. And I've said about this before, I don't like having this ally kind of forced in there. It could be, you could say for balance reasons, but it's kind of wonky at different player counts and different heroes, and just thematically, I don't know. It breaks some leadership builds, either making them too good or messing up your kind of like Avengers thing you're trying to do or anything like that. Builds, which just kind of end up going wonky in these scenarios, which kind of gives them all a serious flaw for me. But I don't put them all in flawed but fun. In fact, I don't believe I put any in there. But I do put Lois Juggernaut probably still at the top of fun. He's a fun kind of bruiser, kind of, Thanos-y, Rhino-y. He just wants to kind of hit you with big damage. But his cards are kind of, they're maybe more interesting than Rhino, but they're also quite one note in that he's going to try and deal his damage to you. And as long as his helmet is off, he's kind of manageable. So it's fine. I don't like this one as much as most people. Most people love Juggernaut. I saw Nelson did a poll once, and it was like 85% plus people, that was their favorite from this box. But not for me. It's actually my least favorite. But I still like it. I do still think the kind of back and forth, how much of a bruiser, brawler kind of scenario this is, it is still just fun. Next up, we have Mr. Sinister, who gets a random kind of attachment, one of the three superpower ones, and that influences how you play this dramatically. Gives him a lot of replayability, which I really like. And the way his encounter cards function kind of differs depending on what attachments he may or may not have yet. And I do like that, but I think they could have gone a bit further with it and combined with the Hope Summers kind of thing. Still think this is a very fun scenario. Really enjoy Mr. Sinister, but it's slightly less satisfying than the ones above it for me. And on a similar note, I think Strife also goes here. Strife to me is kind of interesting, unique with how he works. He's this interesting kind of threat race that almost resembles something from MojoMania in terms of pacing. Like you've got to get this done because the MojoMania scenarios you have to kind of work faster at them, right, than regular ones. You can't just sit around and build and control it. But for me, Strife is slightly strange. I do like how he works, but there's also a lot of card counting, and that combined with Hope Summers means he can't get up to extremely fun. But he's a fun, solid scenario that I generally always actually like playing. I've had some negative things about Strife, but for me, has always been fun. And this brings us to the final expansion remaining. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is coming up in a couple of months, but until then, we have Age of Apocalypse, starting with Unus. And Unus, for me, I like a lot about him, but I talked about this before elsewhere. he's got this thing, the infinites, the kind of mod set that he has to have, and it basically punishes you for blocking with allies. If you don't block with allies, the scenario is super easy. Like if you can play it successfully like that, fine. So it's a little bit hit and miss for me depending on what kind of deck you get. And also, if you take that mod set out of there, a little bit like Drang, Banda, Badoon, take the infinites out of Unis, put them somewhere else, you're gonna get most of the fun of the scenario and all the fun of another one as well. But I still kind of like how it works. It does have more interaction there. So for me, Unis makes it into here and fun. Like he is still just fun all around. I do like everything going on here. Then we have the Four Horsemen, who I really, really like. So this is kind of the revised version of Wrecking Crew. If you watch my Evolution of Villains video, you will see they are extraordinarily similar in more ways than you might expect. But all the bad, weird threat kind of stuff is all removed. They actually have just pretty typical threat and typical main scheme, and that solves basically everything. And also the health is less oppressively, the health in Wrecking Crew, oppressive is the wrong word, but the Wrecking Crew just have so much health to get through on these villains. It takes a long time. It kind of feels like a slog. Whereas, for the Four Horsemen, maybe their HP is a little bit above average, but nothing too much. It all balances out really nicely. They do have a tendency to take away your toys or stop your abilities working, which can be a little bit annoying, and I think stops them moving up to my top 1 or 2 categories. But nonetheless, very, very fun. Always like playing this scenario. And another scenario I always like playing is Apocalypse 1, also just known as Apocalypse. The other Apocalypse scenario has its own name. For me, this is close. I think it goes to the top of extremely fun. Now, depending on the heroes and aspects and things, I think you have very different experiences here. Also, 3 and 4 players very different to like 1 player. But I like the scenario overall. I think it's really fun, really engaging, feels very epic. It's basically Hela version 2, and I'm fine with that. It takes the best parts of Hela, but isn't gameable. You can do the same kind of technique you do with Hela, but I kind of think they anticipate that and it's balanced around it, which is good. They've accepted that, okay, this mechanic is going to be kind of gamed in this way, so let's kind of account for that baseline. And yeah, works great. Really fun. Then we have Dark Beast, and I really like Dark Beast as well. I love the Age of Apocalypse villains, so Dark Beast gets to go to the top of extremely fun. He's got a bit less maybe unique stuff than Apocalypse, or even the Four Horsemen, but kind of like Claw, it's a really fun all-rounder. I can take any hero, any deck kind of up against Dark Beast and kind of know that I'm going to have fun, unless I get very unlucky. But generally, I really like playing Dark Beast. Always fun, whoever you bring. I like the way his mod sets work. It's kind of like Mr. Sinister getting those different attachments. Dark Beast gets different kind of environment from a mod set come in that changes up things, give steady, retaliate, that kind of thing, but also interacts with how he attacks. But once you knock him over to a different form, he gets a different one. And I like that. And if the game goes on long enough and encounter cards go around, they can swap over again, which is really, really fun. And finally, we have Apocalypse. And if you watched everyone's favorite villain video, this is the second one I talked about there. I love Apocalypse 2. This is officially called En Sabaneur as a scenario, and it's just a different version of Apocalypse. And instead of having attachments that, give him overkill and do this and that, he has 3 different forms. He is the Ant-Man of villains. He is in some ways a revised Loki because his 3 different forms are very similar to the different versions of Loki, but they kind of removed all the annoying parts of Loki and made him more dynamic, more interesting, more interaction. I talk about Apocalypse quite a lot in my Evolution of Villains video, so check that out if you're interested. But just, if he's in one form, you have to play around him one way. If he's in a different form, you play around that. But given the way his side schemes work, you can kind of influence him staying in one form longer, or maybe just make him change form sooner, depending on how quickly you want to knock that out. They're just little things that let you interact and play around and do things differently in different forms that always make him compelling, always make every turn exciting. And I just really like Sabaneur, one of my favorite final villains, really contesting with Magneto, and it's very hard for me to pick a favorite between them. So this kind of gives us our tier list, except the top tier that has villains in them is not yet ranked. And I'm going to put the top of them into peak Marvel Champions, into my top 4 or 5. We'll see how we go. And this is really difficult, but in my heart of hearts, Magneto speaks to me, he goes up, and Mutagen Formula also goes up. I just, Magneto, such a good end villain. Green Goblin, such good, in terms of the minion kind of swarm going out, it's just, I don't think it's been done better since Green Goblin Mutagen Formula. Always solid, always fun. I think we'll move up Magog as well for that fun kind of arena fight. I love that style. King, I think, also goes up for being so epic. Just love that scenario, and the kind of, especially in multiplayer, the splitting up, reuniting, how you're going to manage on your own. Who do you join in multiplayer to help out? Super fun, super unique. And I'll pick one more. I will pick N7 Ner. N7 Ner, honestly, is equal, if not bad. I mean, I got to order these. How do I order them? Like these top four, I do think Kang is slightly lower down for me. Um, Maybe I put Kang to the no. He deserves to be up here. You know what? Dark Beast deserves to be here. Boom. That makes it look nice. Um, these villains at the top, I find very hard to order. Like on the left here, these are the best final villains in my opinion. Then we've got the best minion space scenario in my opinion. We've got this kind of huge epic, and then we've got this arena fight kind of bruiser throwdown, and I find it very hard to rank them. Right now, I think it's N7. I just really like how this one functions, the form changing, everything about playing around it. I just think that's a bit more dynamic than Magneto, who's a little bit more static. Um, but otherwise, I think, you know what? I probably do put Magog. I probably put Magog in third place. I just love the way he works. And I think that about does that. Now, I realize I didn't reorder Incredibly Fun, the second tier down here. Um, but but I actually think it's in the right order. I know it's chronological, but Claw and Zola, definitely my two favorites on this one, followed by Thanos and Venom, followed by Mysterio, who's just got that randomness, which has a lot of upsides, but also some downsides, stopping him from going up any further. And then Dark Beast, who just snuck up here, although I easily could have put anyone from, Apocalypse 1, Red Skull, Ebony Maw, Four Horsemen. Any of those are worthy to go up as well. And that concludes my Marvel Champions Villain Fun Ranking tier list. That's a mouthful. We're not calling the video that. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a great day. If you're watching around release time, maybe a very festive day. And if you enjoyed it, let me know what you thought in the comments. Does your list look anything like mine? Who's your top 5? Who's your bottom 5? I'd love to hear about it. I read every comment, even if I don't reply to all of them. Though I do reply to most of them still. And yeah, see you guys in the next video.